Hi again, welcome back. I hope you're enjoying all of these Halloween reviews. At this point, we're well into the month, and now it's the time where I really like to watch some real Halloween classics. And what better way to go than with an absolute classic, Poltergeist. And remember, if you're new here and you enjoy the video, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Now let's start. Poltergeist is the granddaddy family gets into a paranormal situation and needs to get through it together type of movie. I mean, sure, there's Amityville horror as well, which came out a little bit before, but this is where I feel like this subgenre kind of goes into a little divide of its own. You have Amityville, which goes in a more horror direction, and then Poltergeist, which is more about thrills and fun. And especially now, it seems like people really want these type of movies back again, with movies like The Conjuring and Insidious, which are heavily influenced by Poltergeist. And let's not forget the remake. Poltergeist tells the story of a family who live in a somewhat recent housing development. This is your typical Spielbergian family, except this one specifically has a dad who is present. The dad actually works for the housing development, and he's working on selling the new phase of housing. The mother is a stay-at-home that cares for their youngest daughter, and they also have a son who's a little older, and a second daughter in high school or something. The second daughter kind of feels like an unnecessary addition for me. For most of the movie, she's just at a friend's house anyway, and then when she is in the movie, it's just for really overdramatic reactions. I don't know why, but these movies in the 80s and 90s always had people yelling at each other. It was so weird. Also, maybe this is just me, but have you ever noticed the son in these family horror movies always look very similar? Anyway, the mother discovers that there's some sort of supernatural shit going on with objects moving around the kitchen on their own. And it gets to the point where she's able to just replicate this so she can show the husband when he gets home. I find this scene especially scary. It's not really a jump scare, and nothing really gruesome happens. But just the idea of turning around for a second and then turning back to see all of these chairs inhumanly placed within that time in a perfect stack is just unsettling. And the movie just starts off with other scenes like this. Just creepy and unsettling things, but nothing really major happens. Yet. Usually with movies like this, I feel like you'll either have one or the other. Either you get a really slow build and then you catch a glimpse of something horrific at the very end for the last few minutes, or it goes the other way and it's straight from the beginning of the movie, crazy visuals and special effects. But Poltergeist isn't like that. The early scenes start very subtle and slow, and then the kid gets ripped out of his bed by a fucking tree and a little girl ends up in a parallel dimension, and that's the basic plot. Family moves into a brand new home, somehow it ends up haunted, and then the youngest daughter ends up on a separate plane of existence. And they spend the rest of the movie trying to get her back. So who the hell do you even go to in a situation like this? Okay, well that didn't come out yet, but I guess the main characters really do what I would have done myself in this situation. They end up going to a team of paranormal researchers at the local university. But this is the real shit that they've never seen before. I love this scene especially where the father, played by Craig T. Nelson, is showing the researchers into the room where the disturbance was. One of the researchers is talking about how crazy this one EMT recording they got was, and how it was the closest evidence he has to ghosts really being real. And the dad's just like, oh yeah, that's something. And then opens the door to this. And yeah, you can tell from this scene, some of the effects have aged really poorly. But there are only a couple other scenes like this where the effects look really dated. But for a 40-year-old movie, I mean, what can you really expect? That being said, for a 40-year-old movie, there are several visuals that have aged extremely well, mostly because they usually use practical effects. Or they'll use practical effects with a little touch-up of CGI, or just some little editing tricks. This was the real shit. This is like true special effects at its peak. Now, one thing I really like about this horror movie specific is that it's kind of aimed at families. This was made prior to the PG-13 rating, so it's one of the last PG movies that really should have been a PG-13 movie. Like, there are some real adult things in here, but it's never anything like frontal nudity or sex or like an F-bomb or anything like that. It's just like you'll hear things like shit and son of a bitch or something like that. But there's also really gruesome horror scenes because of that as well. For example, I think we all know the infamous face-ripping bathroom scene. And like even something as small as just this scene where the mother goes into the other world and comes back, but she doesn't just physically go there and just get scuffed up. She ends up in this really gross bloody goo thing like surrounding her. It's such an unnecessary addition, but it actually does add a lot. It's not gross in a way where you're saying yuck. It's gross in a way that you're kind of chuckling because it's like, oh, that's crazy. Something like that. It's a fun movie. And seeing scenes like this as a very small child kind of makes you feel like it's a movie that your parents are letting you get watched and you're kind of getting away with, and they're just turning a blind eye. One of those little special treat movies. I think Poltergeist kind of sits in a weird place if placed on a spectrum compared to every other horror movie. Like, the movie does get real, and there's a lot of very realistic scenes where characters are just going through very emotional struggles. And they act in a way that I would act as a parent in this situation. Or even the children act in a way that I would have acted like as a child in this situation. So a lot of these scenes where the characters get really serious. But then at the same time, there's a lot of scenes where the acting is super cheesy and some of the characters are kind of hamming it up. I mentioned the over-emotional daughter already, but the mom kind of acts really bizarre at some scenes as well. Or just plain silly. But the dad plays it serious the whole time. Except for the end where he's just yelling in the guy's face. Move the headstones! But I don't know, maybe I would do that too. It's still pretty funny to watch though. The movie is also very legitimately scary at times as well. For example, another iconic scene. But then at the same time, you have a lot of comedic moments like this one. And I think the perfect crossroads of these two elements is the medium character who's played by Zelda Rubinstein. She's kind of mostly famous for this movie and its sequels. By the way, we're not going to talk about the sequels. I don't want to go down that path. And if anybody else watched it, she did the narration for the show The Scariest Places on Earth. One day I'm going to talk about that show. Unfortunately, I won't have time this Halloween, but I'm definitely going to talk about it. I love that show. But anyway, Rubinstein plays a character that would be way too campy or simply out of place in a horror movie done now, but an essential component of this one. By the way, on another little side note, I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that they used real corpses for this scene. If you didn't know, well, now you know. And if you did know, what the fuck, man? And I also didn't want to end the video without talking about the amazing soundtrack. This was a time where soundtracks were an original score for every scene. And the score of this one goes with every feeling of the rest of the movie, from very frightening to thrilling to almost like childlike and innocent. This is a very unique movie with a very particular feel to it. And I think every element of the movie captures that very well. But anyway, Poltergeist is about the strength of a family and the bond between people that can overcome great adversity. It's a unique movie that could have only been made at the particular point in time where it was made, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's fun, but it's not too fun that it doesn't scare you anymore. Poltergeist is like a roller coaster that's horror themed. It's thrilling, but it's a little bit genuinely scary at moments too. Anyway, I think this is a great one to add to your Halloween watch list, so give it a watch this Halloween. Thanks for watching, that's all I have to say about that. Oh, and real quick, don't forget the stream October 31st at 6 p.m. I'll be doing Resident Evil 2, the remake version. See you then.